She said, "You should have died like that," and when I refused to give her more money, something inside me went still. And in that stillness I vanished and took every cent with me. This is how I lost everything, and then found myself. And if you're watching this video, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The photograph of Robert stared back at me as I placed fresh lilies in the vase beside it. For years gone, and yet some days the absence felt as fresh as yesterday. My fingers tracing the edge of the silver frame as I remembered how his hands had felt on mine, warm, steady, gone. "Mom, did you take your medication this morning?" Amber's voice floated in from the kitchen, that hint of impatience barely concealed beneath a veneer of concern. "Yes, dear. I didn't mention that I had been managing my own medication for 40 years before she appointed herself my caretaker. Small battles were no longer worth the energy." From the doorway I watched her rummage through my mail, sorting bills into neat piles. My youngest child, my miracle baby, born when I was 37 after years of fertility treatments, now 29, still living at home, still finding herself. The boys had established their lives years ago, Thomas with his medical practice in Boston, Michael with his engineering projects in Japan, but Amber remained perpetually in transition. "The property tax bill came today," she said casually, slipping an envelope into her purse. "I'll take care of it. I'd like to see it first." The words escaped before I could measure their impact. Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Why? So you can worry about it. You have enough on your plate, Mom." The familiar script, the same lines she'd used during Robert's illness when she gradually took control of our accounts for our protection. She'd claimed to spare us worry during Robert's 18-month battle with pancreatic cancer. "I'm not an invalid, Amber. Just because I'm grieving doesn't mean I can't handle my affairs." She sighed dramatically. "Thomas called earlier. His malpractice suit is still dragging on." He sounded stressed. The sudden shift of topic, another familiar tactic. My oldest son's legal troubles had consumed him for nearly 2 years, leaving little time for family matters. Whenever I suggested he visit more often, Amber always had reasons why my bothering him would only add to his burden. "Maybe I should call him back," I offered, reaching for my phone. "I already told him you were resting," she said sharply. "Mom, I'm trying to protect you. Everyone's busy with their own lives. I'm the only one who stayed to take care of you." The guilt. I swallowed my objection and nodded. Later that evening, at the dining table, she casually mentioned needing money for a photography course in New York, the 5th course in 3 years, none completed. "Have you thought about looking for a more permanent position?" I suggested carefully, "something that could lead to a career." Her fork clattered against her plate. "The boys always got everything. Thomas had that Boston apartment during his residency. Michael got help with his down payment. You never believed in me." I stared at my daughter, and for the first time I saw what I had been blind to for years behind the indignation. Something calculated, something cold. Since Robert's death, I had lived in a fog of grief, and I began to wonder whether I was truly seeing my daughter now, or merely the role she had perfected while I was drowning. When the bank's number flashed on my phone screen, it felt unexpected, almost ominous. I answered with trepidation, my hands suddenly clammy. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Diane Fletcher from Bank of America. We have a situation requiring your immediate attention." My heart skipped. "What's happened?" "There's been an attempt to increase your credit limit substantially. Our senior protection system flagged it. We need your personal verification." I sank into a kitchen chair. "I never requested any increase." "I suspected as much." Diane's voice softened. "Mrs. Wilson, would you be able to come to the branch today? There are some matters I believe we should discuss in person." 2 hours later, I sat across from her in her office, staring at account statements I had never seen before, transaction after transaction, withdrawals, loans, credit cards I had never applied for. "These are all in my name," I whispered, my finger trembling as it traced down the column of numbers. "But I didn't authorize any of this." Diane's expression remained professionally neutral, though her eyes held sympathy. "The most recent charge was $15,000 3 days ago. Does that ring any bells?" I shook my head, suddenly cold, despite the warmth of the office. "Mrs. Wilson, I don't want to overstep." She hesitated. "But does anyone else have access to your financial information?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. I knew the answer, had probably known it for months, but speaking, it would make it real. "My daughter helps me with my finances." Diane nodded carefully. "I see. My recommendation is not to confront anyone yet. First, let's secure your accounts. Then, if you're comfortable, we should discuss next steps." I left the bank with temporary passwords, a blocked credit card, and a hollowness in my chest no medication could touch. I drove to Willow Creek Cafe and texted Amber to meet me there. Public places felt safer somehow. She arrived 20 minutes late, flustered, checking her phone repeatedly. I can't stay long. What's so urgent it couldn't wait until dinner? I drew in a steady breath. I'd like to start handling my own finances again. Her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips, suspended there as if time itself had stalled. Where is this coming from? She asked, her voice tightening. I think it's time. Robert has been gone for years. I need to start standing on my own. For a flicker of a second, her expression shifted like quicksand, something unstable moving beneath the surface. After everything I've done, I saved you when Dad was dying. You couldn't even pay bills correctly. I held her gaze, my heart pounding. Amber, there was a $15,000 charge. She shot to her feet so abruptly that her chair scraped harshly against the floor, coffee sloshing over the rim of her cup and spilling across the table. Then she said, it cold, sharp, meant to wound. You should have died instead of Dad. At least he loved me for real. The cafe fell silent around us. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Faces turned toward our table, then quickly away, embarrassed by the intimacy of our fracture. Shame burned through me, not for anything I had done, but for what I had allowed to happen. With as much dignity as I could gather, I placed a $20 bill on the table and walked out, my spine straight, my steps measured, holding my tears in place until I reached the safety of my car. Only then did I allow myself to shatter. Later, sitting across from Kevin Matthews, the bank's fraud specialist, I listened as he spoke gently while laying document after document before me. The pattern of transactions suggests this has been happening for approximately 4 years. Mrs. Wilson, it began small during your husband's illness and escalated after his passing. I stared at what appeared to be my signature on loan applications I had never seen. That's not my handwriting, I whispered. It's close, but the W is different. Kevin nodded. Unfortunately, elder financial abuse often involves forgery, most commonly by someone who has observed your signature many times. What happens now? My voice sounded distant, even to my own ears. The bank will initiate an internal investigation. However, he hesitated. Recovery can be challenging when family members are involved. I strongly recommend legal counsel specializing in elder abuse cases. I left with a thick folder of documents and Kevin's business card, a name written on the back in careful ink. David Cohen, attorney at law. That night I sat alone in my empty kitchen, the house creaking around me in familiar, lonely rhythms. The pasta I had made for dinner went cold on the stove as I stared at the papers spread across the table. For decades of marriage, and I had never once balanced a checkbook. Robert had handled everything financial. When he got sick, Amber stepped in. I had been grateful. Relief had blinded me. The telephone rang, making me jump. Mom, it's Michael. My middle child's voice carried across continents, calling from halfway around the world. Just checking in. How are you? I looked down at the financial statements. I'm fine, dear. How's Japan wrapping up? I should be stateside permanently in about 3 months. Listen, I tried calling the house, but no answer. Is everything okay? The truth pressed against my teeth. I nearly told him everything. But what would that accomplish? Michael was thousands of miles away, focused on completing his project. Thomas was already drowning in his malpractice suit. And Amber, everything's fine, I lied softly. Just busy with church activities. After we hung up, I reached for my laptop, a Christmas gift from the children that I rarely used. I opened a browser and typed, "How to identify financial elder abuse." The results made my stomach clench. Every description matched my situation with chilling precision. One website advised documenting everything, securing important papers, and seeking professional help immediately. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone and dialed the number on Kevin's card. "Mr. Cohen's office," a woman answered. "My name is Margaret Wilson," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I need to speak with Mr. Cohen about financial elder abuse. I believe my daughter has been stealing from me for years." Saying it aloud broke something open inside me, pain. Yes, but also clarity. The truth, however terrible, was finally in the light. And in that moment I understood I could not face this alone. Tomorrow I would speak with Pastor Jim, not about forgiveness. That would come later, but about strength. Because strength was what I needed most. I'm Diana Reynolds. The woman sitting across from me days later did not offer a handshake, only a business card and direct, assessing eye contact. Mr. Cohen says, "You need a financial investigator." I studied her mid-50s. No nonsense suit, hair pulled back severely, no jewelry except small gold studs, nothing about her invited casual conversation. Exactly what I needed. "Can you find out what happened to my money?" I asked plainly. "If there's a paper trail, yes." She opened a notebook. "But I need complete honesty from you, Mrs. Wilson. No protecting anyone. No excuses." I flinched, then nodded. "Good. First rule. Don't confront your daughter. Don't change your behavior. Act normal." "How can I possibly?" "You must," Diana interrupted. "The moment she suspects an investigation, evidence will disappear. Bank records can be subpoenaed, but if she's using cash or transfers to third parties, we need to catch those in real time." And so, over the next few weeks, I lived a double life. On the surface, Margaret Wilson, widow, mother, church volunteer. Beneath that calm exterior, a woman working with a growing team of professionals to document a betrayal so thorough it stole my breath. I watched Amber check my mail, removing anything financial. I noticed how casually she asked for my phone when a banking text came through. I observed her discreetly photographing documents from my desk. Each incident was recorded meticulously by Diana, who required me to keep a daily log of every interaction. David Cohen prepared legal documents I never imagined, needing power of attorney revocations, cease and desist orders, civil complaints. The day Diana called me into her office again, her expression was grimmer than usual. Without preamble, she slid a folder across the desk. "We found the life insurance money, Robert's policy, $450,000 that was supposed to be divided among your 3 children. I'd assumed the executive had handled it, truly believed it was already taken care of. But as I opened the folder Diana had placed in front of me, she began explaining the property records in a tone that was careful and precise, and I felt the first crack in the world. I thought I understood. Your daughter purchased a Manhattan apartment for $850,000 3 years ago. The down payment was exactly $150,000, 1/3 of your husband's policy. But she lives with me, I whispered, because she had told me she couldn't afford her own place. And Diana continued, saying it's rented out, $42,500 monthly income that's being deposited into an account you don't know about. And my hands began to shake as I tried to reconcile the numbers with the girl who had stood in my kitchen telling me she was struggling financially. My voice broke. She asked me for money last week for basic expenses. And Diana's expression softened marginally as she said, "Mrs. Wilson, we have enough. It's time to involve your sons. They have their own problems." I protested automatically. Thomas with his lawsuit, Michael overseas. But Diana did not look away as she told me your daughter has stolen approximately $180,000. Beyond the insurance money, your home has been remortgaged without your knowledge. Your credit is severely compromised. And when her eyes met mine directly, she said, "This isn't something you can handle alone anymore." And as I left Diana's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Amber Maid, "Your favorite for dinner. Don't be late." And the casual cruelty of it, the pretense of caring while systematically destroying my future, made me grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Because for the first time since this began, what I felt wasn't hurt or betrayal, it was rage. "You have several options," David Cohen explained later, his office smelling of leather and lemon polish, each with different implications. And I sat straighter, conscious of my posture, aware that the Margaret Wilson who had walked into his office 6 weeks ago had been hunched with shame. But today I felt different, not stronger yet, but no longer diminished. And he continued, "Criminal charges would likely result in jail time. Civil action could recover assets but takes longer. Family intervention with legal oversight is fastest but requires her cooperation." While Diana Reynolds, seated beside me, added that the evidence is solid: multiple instances of forgery, identity theft, fraudulent loans. "The decision is yours, but you need protection immediately." And I considered the folder in my lap, photographs of my daughter entering banks with documents, ATM camera shots of her withdrawing from accounts I didn't know existed, my forged signature on loan applications, and I asked, "How do I protect myself right now?" My voice steady in a way that surprised me. And over the next 2 weeks, I implemented their recommendations: credit freezes, new accounts at different institutions, formal disputes of fraudulent loans, each step small, each building toward security. Meanwhile, I began sessions with Dr. Eleanor Simmons, a therapist specializing in family trauma, and during our second session she asked, When did you first notice concerning behavior from Amber? And I thought back to when she took money from my purse as a teenager, small amounts at first. And when we confronted her, there was always a dramatic explanation. And when Dr. Simmons asked how my husband responded, a memory surfaced of Robert writing a check to a local shop owner after 16-year-old Amber was caught shoplifting. Let's handle this privately, he'd insisted. No need for records that could hurt her future. And I admitted he protected her. We both did when she struggled in college, dropping out after changing majors repeatedly. We called it finding herself. When she couldn't hold jobs, we blamed difficult bosses. And after your husband's diagnosis, she seemed to transform overnight, suddenly responsible, handling paperwork, dealing with insurance, and I was so grateful. Twisting my wedding ring as I told Dr. Simmons I thought she'd finally matured, and when Dr. Simmons leaned forward and said, "Margaret, you've mentioned feeling ashamed several times. I'd like to address that." I asked, shouldn't I be? I was blind to what was happening. And she reminded me I was grieving my husband while supporting him through terminal illness, then navigating widowhood, overwhelming life events that predators, even family members, exploit, and predators stuck in my throat because that's my daughter you're talking about. And yes, she said gently, an understanding that someone you love intentionally caused harm is its own trauma. We need to address both the financial abuse and this emotional betrayal. And later that evening, swimming laps at the community pool, my first exercise in years, I considered Dr. Simmons' words, each stroke through the water like pushing against the weight of my own guilt. And nearby, a woman my age completed a perfect dive, and as she surfaced, I recognized Patricia Henderson from my old book club. "Margaret Wilson, haven't seen you here in ages." And I replied, "I'm getting back into it," suddenly self-conscious in my old swimsuit, and she smiled genuinely and said, "Some of us meet for coffee after swimming on Thursdays. You should join us." And for a moment I hesitated because new routines meant questions about my life, questions I wasn't ready to answer. But then I remembered Diana's advice, reclaim pieces of yourself, one small step at a time, and I said, I'd like that, surprising myself with how much I meant it. And 6 months later, Patricia was peering over my shoulder at the spreadsheet on my laptop saying, "You're getting the hang of this." 6 months since that day at the bank. 6 months of learning a language I should have mastered decades ago. Still feels like reading hieroglyphics, I admitted, adjusting my new glasses. My first independent purchase after opening accounts, Patricia had helped me establish, and she told me I was being too hard on myself because most people spend years learning financial management, and I discovered she was a retired forensic accountant who had specialized in banking fraud cases, and our poolside friendship had evolved into weekly financial literacy sessions at my kitchen table. My kitchen in my new apartment, smaller than the house I'd shared with Robert, but entirely mine, because the sale of our family home had been necessary after discovering the extent of the remortgaging Amber had arranged without my knowledge, the loss still aching but less sharply now. And then my phone buzzed with a message from Thomas' mom. "Michael's flight gets in tomorrow night. We'll drive up together the next morning for the meeting." "How are you holding up?" he asked, and I answered truthfully, "I'm prepared." Because after months of investigation, documentation, and preparation, tomorrow would be the first time my 3 children would be in the same room since Robert's funeral, the first time I would confront Amber with my son's present. And he said, "We'll be there by 10, love you, Mom." And after hanging up, I caught my reflection in the window, noticing how my hair, silver white now without the auburn dye Amber had insisted took years off, was cut in a practical bob instead of the matronly style I'd worn for decades, and how the nervous smile and apologetic posture were gone, replaced by something quieter but more certain, while Patricia gathered her things and said, "Big day tomorrow, get some rest." And I walked her to the door, thanking her for everything, and she replied, "Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow will be hard. Family confrontations always are." And after she left, I sat on my small balcony watching the sunset as the community garden below buzzed with early evening activity. Elderly couples tending vegetables, children helping grandparents water flowers, when my phone buzzed again, Amber's name lighting the screen. "Mom, I need to cancel dinner tomorrow. Something came up with friends." Rain check, the casual lie landing exactly as I expected since she had no idea I knew about tomorrow's meeting. Orchestrated through the family attorney as a discussion of estate planning, and something twisted inside me, but I replied in the familiar script, still easy after months of pretense, "That's fine, dear, take care," and set the phone down, remembering Dr. Simmons's words from our session that morning. "Tomorrow will feel like an ending, but it's actually a beginning, the start of truth in your family system, though I wasn't sure Thomas and Michael were ready for that truth, because our few careful conversations had revealed their own blindness about their sister Thomas, dismissing her as merely irresponsible. Michael, making excuses about her finding her path on tomorrow, would change everything for all of us. The careful documentation, the legal preparations, the financial evidence all becoming real in ways that couldn't be ignored or explained away. And as darkness fell, I moved inside, pausing at the small desk where I kept Robert's photograph, whispering, "I wish you were here, but I think you'd be proud of me now." And for the first time, I believed those words might actually be true. Michael arrived first, dark circles under his eyes, betraying his jet lag. My middle child, always the peacemaker, hugging me tightly and studying me as he said, "You look different, Mom. I mean that in a good way." And I replied, pouring him coffee in my small kitchen, "Life changes us," before asking how it felt to be back stateside permanently, and he answered, "Adjustment." The Tokyo team still calls at 3 a.m., sipping his coffee and glancing around my new apartment, saying, "This place suits you, though I'm still confused why you sold the house so suddenly." And before I could answer, a sharp knock announced Thomas's arrival, my oldest entering with his characteristic purposeful stride, briefcase in hand, eyes quickly scanning my living space, saying after brief hugs, "Downsizing was smart. That house was too much maintenance." Always the practical one, making assessments and finding solutions. And we sat at my kitchen table while the brothers exchanged updates about careers and families. I, letting them talk and watching their familiar dynamics unfold. Thomas taking charge, Michael mediating, roles established in childhood unchanged by decades, until Thomas finally checked his watch and said, "So, what's this meeting about? Your text mentioned financial concerns," and I took a breath and said, "We should wait for the others." And Michael looked confused, asking, "Others? Who else is coming?" And the doorbell answered his question as David Cohen entered first, followed by Diana Reynolds, whose expression remained professionally neutral as she nodded to my sons, and Thomas's voice sharpened with concern. "What's going on, Mom?" And I gestured to the living room where additional chairs had been arranged, saying, "Please, let's sit down. We're expecting one more person." While David placed his briefcase on the coffee table and explained, "Margaret has asked us to help facilitate a family discussion. I'm her attorney," and Michael's eyebrows shot up as he asked, "Attorney? Mom, are you in some kind of trouble?" But Diana checked her watch and said, "Not your mother. Your sister should be arriving shortly." And the confusion on my sons' faces might have been comical in another context as Thomas asked, "Amber knows about this meeting." And I explained, "She believes it's about estate planning. She doesn't know the real purpose." And Michael's voice carried an edge now as he asked, "Which is what exactly?" And I looked at both my sons, these men I'd raised, now middle-aged with graying temples and lives I was largely absent from, wondering how we had become such strangers before saying plainly, "Your sister has been systematically stealing from me for the past 4 years. Today, we're going to address it as a family." And the shock on their faces confirmed what I'd suspected. Neither had seen it coming. Thomas, recovering first with his doctor's analytical mind, immediately seeking evidence as he said, "That's a serious accusation. What proof?" But a knock at the door cut him off, and Diana moved to answer it, returning with Amber, whose smile faltered as she took in the assembled group and whose eyes darted between her brothers as she said, "What's going on? I thought this was about Mom's will." And David's tone turned courtroom formal as he said, "Please sit down, Amber. We have matters to discuss regarding your mother's finances." And I watched her face carefully, the flicker of panic quickly masked by indignation, the slight step backward, the reflexive reach for her purse as she said, voice rising slightly, "I don't understand, Mom. What is this?" And before I could speak, David opened his briefcase, removing a thick folder. "I have here documentation of approximately 4 years of financial transactions conducted in Margaret Wilson's name, without her knowledge or consent." David began, and Amber's face drained of color as he methodically laid out bank statements, loan documents, property records, each one a nail in the coffin of her deception. And Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, asking, "Is this true? Have you been stealing from Mom?" And so it began, Amber's voice escalating instantly to a familiar pitch as she shot back, "This is ridiculous." The same tone I recognized from when she'd been caught shoplifting at 16. "Mom obviously doesn't understand what she's saying. She's been confused lately." But Thomas's face hardened as he replied, The evidence looks pretty damn clear to me. And Amber snapped, "What evidence?" "Some paperwork. Mom asked me to handle her finances. She couldn't manage after Dad died." Then turned to me with wide, pleading eyes. "Tell them, Mom, tell them how you asked for my help." And I met my daughter's gaze steadily and said, "I asked you to help with bill payments during your father's illness. I never authorized loans, credit cards, or remortgaging our home." And she seized on the word immediately. Our home. That house belonged to all of us. Her strategy shifting in an instant. I grew up there, too. I stayed while they left, gesturing wildly at her brothers, while Michael, always the mediator, stepped forward and began gently. "Amber, if there's been a misunderstanding," but Diana interrupted firmly, opening her laptop and saying, "There's no misunderstanding. We have video from bank cameras, documented patterns of forgery, and testimony from financial institutions." Then turned the screen to show footage of Amber at an ATM, then at a bank counter, presenting documents. The timestamp, clearly showing a date 6 months prior, and Amber challenged, "So what? I was handling Mom's banking. She knew about it." But David removed another document from his folder and said, "This is a forensic handwriting analysis of Margaret's signature compared to signatures on loan documents. They were forged." And Thomas moved closer, his medical training drawing him toward the evidence as he examined the comparison points and murmured, "These comparison points are conclusive." Then looked up at Amber, disbelief hardening into certainty. "You forged Mom's signature repeatedly." And Amber's voice cracked as she shot back, "You don't understand what it's been like. Stuck here while you two built your perfect lives. Who took care of Mom and Dad? Who was here every day during his cancer treatments? Me." And Thomas demanded, "So that justifies theft." But she insisted. It wasn't theft. It was fair compensation for everything I sacrificed. And Michael sank heavily into a chair, running his hands through his hair as he asked quietly, "The insurance money, Amber, was that fair compensation?" And she asked too quickly, "What insurance money?" Her eyes darting, and Diana calmly pulled up property records on her laptop, explaining, "The Manhattan apartment purchased with the proceeds from Robert Wilson's life insurance policy, a policy that, according to his will, was to be divided equally among his 3 children." And Amber shouted, gesturing at her brothers, "I needed it more than they did. Thomas makes surgeon money. Michael has that fancy international career. What about me?" And I watched my daughter's performance, the tears, the accusations, the righteous anger on, wondered how many times I had seen this exact display when she was confronted with consequences. How many times Robert and I had retreated, believing her distress was punishment enough, until finally I said quietly, cutting through her escalating tirade, "Amber," and she froze mid-sentence, unused to that tone from me. And I continued, my voice steady, "You stole from me. You betrayed my trust while I was grieving. You forged my signature. You took your brother's inheritance. These are crimes, not misunderstandings." And when she tried to interrupt, "Mom," I raised my hand and said, "I'm not finished. For months, I've documented everything, working with legal and financial experts. Today, you have a choice to make." And David outlined the options: criminal charges, which would likely result in prison time, or a strictly supervised repayment agreement with legal oversight. And Amber's face contorted with rage as she demanded, "You would send your own daughter to prison, after everything I've done for this family." But I replied, finding strength I didn't know I possessed, "I didn't create this situation. You did. Every forged signature, every stolen dollar, every lie." And she turned desperately to her brothers, asking, "Are you both going to let her do this to me?" And Thomas stood rigidly, arms crossed, saying, "You stole our inheritance, Amber. You robbed our mother. What exactly do you expect us to say?" While Michael, always softer, looked torn and said, "Amber, if you cooperate, make amends." But she spat the words back, "Make amends? I'm the only one who sacrificed for this family. I deserve that money." And in that moment, watching my youngest child reveal who she truly was, I felt a strange sense of clarity as the fog of maternal guilt and obligation lifted, revealing the simple truth that love couldn't heal what Amber refused to acknowledge was broken. And I rose from my chair and said, "You have 24 hours to decide. Criminal charges or supervised repayment. Your choice." And her expression shifted from rage to disbelief as she whispered, "You can't be serious." And I answered, "I've never been more serious in my life." And 2 days later, David informed me, closing his leather portfolio. "She signed the agreement, reluctantly. But it's legally binding. 2 days having passed since the confrontation. 2 days of silence from Amber after her tearful exit from my apartment. Thomas escorting her out while Michael had sat shell-shocked on my couch. And I asked, accepting the copy David handed me, "What happens now?" And he explained, "The apartment goes on the market immediately. Proceeds will be divided per your husband's will. The repayment schedule for other funds begins next month, supervised by the court for 5 years," while Diana, joining us via video call, added, "We've initiated disputes with the financial institutions. Some have already agreed to partial forgiveness based on the fraud evidence, and it all felt surreal. Reducing 4 years of betrayal to legal documents and repayment schedules. The practical resolution of an emotional devastation felt almost surreal, as if paperwork and signatures could somehow contain the wreckage of what had happened. And I couldn't help asking, did she say anything about why? Though I already suspected there would be no answer that could satisfy a mother's heart. And David hesitated before saying, "Mrs. Wilson, in my experience with similar cases, there's rarely a satisfying explanation. Opportunity, rationalization, these are common factors, but they don't provide the closure families hope for." And after they left, I walked to the community center where I had begun volunteering 3 afternoons weekly, the routine anchoring me as I cataloged donated books, helped elderly neighbors with technology questions, and taught a basic financial literacy class that had started as a joke but quickly attracted a dozen regular attendees. And Patricia waved from the reception desk saying, "Margaret, you've got visitors." And I found Thomas and Michael standing awkwardly in the lobby, both looking exhausted. We hadn't spoken since they'd left my apartment after the confrontation, so I suggested, "Let's get coffee," leading them to the center's small cafe. And once seated, Thomas spoke first. "We met with Amber and her attorney this morning," and I nodded, waiting, while Michael added carefully, "She's not remorseful. She still believes she was entitled to the money." And I said, "I know," because the knowledge hurt but no longer surprised me. And then Thomas said suddenly, "Mom, I owe you an apology. I should have been more present after Dad died. I let my own problems become an excuse." And Michael added, "We both did. We saw what we wanted to see with Amber. It was easier than acknowledging the truth. And I studied my sons, one precise and driven, the other diplomatic and peace-seeking, both carrying their own guilt now," and finally said, "We all failed each other in different ways. But that's in the past. What matters is what we do now." And Thomas straightened, ever the problem solver, saying, "We've been discussing options. The dispute with the second mortgage might take months to resolve. In the meantime, we can help with." And I interrupted gently, "I appreciate that, but I'm managing." And they exchanged surprised glances. "Really?" And I continued, "My expenses are minimal now. The apartment is affordable. I'm receiving Social Security. And the church fund from your father's service has helped with legal fees." And when Michael began, "But the money Amber took," I finished, "will be addressed through the legal system. Meanwhile, I'm rebuilding my life, not the one I had, but perhaps the one I need now." And I told them about my volunteer work, my swimming routine, the financial classes with Patricia, the new friends I'd made, and with each example their expressions shifted from concern to something like wonder, until Thomas said, "Mom, you're different," and I agreed simply, "Yes, I am." And as we parted with promises of more regular visits, I felt a weight lifting, not the pain of Amber's betrayal that would linger, but the burden of being solely defined as a victim of it. And walking home, I noticed a help wanted sign in the window of Hartwell's bookshop, and on impulse entered, greeted by a gray-haired woman behind the counter who asked, "Can I help you find something?" And I surprised myself by replying, "Actually, I'm interested in the position advertised." And she looked me over appraisingly and asked, "Experience?" And I said, 40 years as a reader, 6 months cataloging at the community center, a lifetime of recommending books to reluctant readers, and I'm extremely reliable." And she warned, "Part-time only, 15 hours weekly, mostly afternoons." And I replied, "Perfect." And as I left with an application form, my phone buzzed with a text from Amber, "This isn't over. You'll regret what you've done." And I stared at the message, feeling the familiar twist of pain, but something else too. A certainty that hadn't existed before, and I deleted the message without responding, and continued walking, head high. "Mrs. Wilson, your 9 o'clock is here," called Jenny, the bookshop's college-aged assistant. 8 months having passed since I'd started working at Hartwell's 3 afternoons weekly, what began as a distraction becoming a source of unexpected joy, and I called back, "Send them back," arranging chairs in our small reading nook for the Classics for Coffee book club. my suggestion to Eleanor Hartwell, the shop's owner, now 12 members strong, bringing steady business and filling Thursday mornings with lively discussion. And before the group arrived, I checked my phone and saw a text from Thomas Court, approved final settlement terms. Embar has 30 days to begin payments, and nearly a year had passed since the confrontation. The legal proceedings moving glacially but steadily. The Manhattan apartment finally sold after 9 months on the market at a loss, but sufficient to provide Thomas and Michael their shares of Robert's insurance, my portion remaining in an account managed by the court trustee as part of the overall restitution plan. And the bookshop bell jingled as my group entered, mostly retirees with 2 high school teachers who adjusted their schedules to attend, and we were discussing Middlemarch today, George Eliot's Examination of Provincial Life and Thwarted Ambition, and Helen, a retired English professor, observed, "Margaret, you're glowing today, good news." And I smiled, distributing coffee cups, moving forward on a difficult situation, because they knew fragments of my story, not the details, but enough to understand I'd faced significant betrayal and financial hardship. Their quiet support, another unexpected gift of this new chapter. And after the discussion, as I shelved returned books, Eleanor approached and said, "That community outreach program you suggested is really taking off. 3 senior centers have requested workshops, referring to the program, offering basic financial literacy to seniors that had started small with just Patricia and me, visiting the local retirement community, and had now grown to 5 volunteer instructors, including a retired banker and a former economics teacher." Bank of America called again. Eleanor continued, "They want to sponsor the program formally, provide materials, even a small stipend for instructors," and I nearly dropped the book I was holding as I said, "That's Diane Fletcher's doing your guardian angel at the bank, probably." And Elalana smiled warmly, telling me, "You've built something important here, Margaret, something that will help others avoid what happened to you." And that evening, walking home through the park, I paused at the duck pond and let the cool air settle around me, thinking that a year ago I couldn't have imagined this life working part-time, teaching financial literacy, hosting a book club, small things perhaps, but mine, chosen, not inherited or thrust upon me. And when my phone rang, it was Michael calling from his new office in Boston asking, "Mom, have you checked your email? I forwarded something you should see." And at home, I opened my laptop to find an email from Amba, addressed to both brothers with the subject line, "This family is dead to me." The message brief but vicious, accusing all of us of betrayal, and claiming she would make minimum payments only because legal thugs forced her to. The final line reading, "Don't contact me again, any of you." And I closed the laptop, surprisingly calm, asking Michael, who had stayed on the phone, "Are you okay?" And he answered gently, "Shouldn't I be asking you that? She's your daughter." And I agreed, yes, and I'll always love the child she was, but I can't excuse the adult she's chosen to become. And later, preparing for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and saw a woman with clear eyes and straight shoulders, silver hair framing a face with fewer anxiety lines than a year ago, not younger, but more present. And I remembered Dr. Simmons asking in our final session what I had learned from this ordeal. My answer surprising us both when I said, "I learned that losing everything isn't the end sometimes, it's the beginning." And as I turned out the light, my phone buzzed with a final text from Thomas, "You never deserved any of this, Mom, but I'm proud of who you've become through it." And for the first time in years I fell asleep without wondering what crisis tomorrow might bring. 2 years clean, announced Janice, beaming as the support group applauded. Never thought I'd say that after 40 years of smoking. And I smiled, genuinely happy for her, because the new chapters group at the community center had become a weekly fixture in my life, not specifically for fraud victims, but for anyone rebuilding after significant life changes. Janice, having joined after her COPD diagnosis, determined to quit smoking and reclaim her health. And when the facilitator asked, "Margaret, would you like to share today?" I nodded, aware of several new faces in the circle, and said, "I'm Margaret. 3 years ago I discovered my youngest child had been systematically defrauding me since my husband's illness, and today marks 18 months since our legal resolution." The room staying respectfully quiet as they had heard variations of my story before, though I added new reflections as my journey evolved. "Last week something unexpected happened," I continued. "I received a letter from my daughter, the first direct communication in over a year. the letter having arrived without warning. No return address, but Amber's handwriting immediately recognizable. And I explained. She didn't apologize explicitly, but she mentioned she's working steadily for the first time, managing her own finances, and her therapist suggested eventual mediated contact if I'm ever open to it. And when the facilitator asked, "How did that make you feel?" I considered carefully before answering. Cautious, the letter showed some small progress. She acknowledged her actions without fully claiming responsibility. But there were no demands, no manipulation tactics. And that's new. And when someone asked, "Will you respond?" I said, "I have a acknowledged receipt," and said, "I need more time and evidence of sustained change before considering any contact." Smiling slightly, as I added, 3 years ago I couldn't have set that boundary. I would have rushed to forgive, to fix, to restore what was broken regardless of the cost to myself. And after the meeting I walked to the shoreline park that had become my thinking place, the small seaside community I now called home, offering a peace I hadn't known was possible. My modest rental cottage surrounded by lavender and rosemary sitting 4 blocks from this beach. Thomas and Michael visiting regularly, now Thomas monthly from Boston. Michael more frequently since accepting a position at a nearby university. Our relationships evolving into something more honest and less defined by old family roles. And my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Conference call with the bank in 30 minutes. Don't forget, because our financial literacy program had expanded beyond expectations. What began as informal workshops now operating as a small nonprofit. Secure Futures offering education throughout the county. Bank of America becoming our primary sponsor, with Diane Fletcher joining our advisory board after her retirement. And as I walked home, I reflected on the journey, the financial wounds healing slowly with some fraudulent loans forgiven and others restructured. Amber's court-ordered payments arriving irregularly but consistently enough to avoid legal consequences. And the deeper healing coming from unexpected sources, the bookshop community. My volunteer work, teaching others to protect themselves, reconnecting with my sons as adults rather than as their mother's keeper. And at home, I prepared for the conference call, reviewing our program metrics. The cottage kitchen table, now my office, holding neat stacks of curriculum materials. My laptop, once intimidating, had become an essential tool, and at 69, I had mastered skills I once considered beyond my reach. Before dialing in, I glanced at Robert's photograph, now joined by pictures of Thomas's children and Michael's recent wedding, and softly to his image I said, "You wouldn't recognize me now, but I think you'd be proud," for the betrayal had nearly destroyed me, the legal battle had drained me, and the family fracture still ached like a wound that would never fully heal. Yet standing in my small kitchen, preparing to discuss the program that had helped dozens of seniors protect themselves from similar exploitation, I felt something I had thought permanently lost. Purpose, a path I hadn't chosen but that had chosen me through circumstances I would never have willingly accepted, and walking it had revealed strengths I never knew I possessed, and connections I might otherwise never have made. As I dialed into the conference call, I caught my reflection in the window strapback, clear-eyed, present, not defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I had built from the ruins. Not the life I had planned, but finally, completely my own. And I reminded myself aloud, thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.